Imagine this. It is 1 in the morning, and a woman, 8 months pregnant, is shivering in the dark of her Chicago loft during a brutal blizzard. The power has gone out. Her husband, an independent app developer, is supposedly at a hacker conference in Berlin, networking with other visionaries. He is not answering his phone. She goes to his old coding desk, looking for the manual for the backup generator. And in that moment, her entire world fractures. She finds a cryptic external hard drive tucked away in a drawer, and after a few failed attempts, she guesses the password. An old inside joke between them. It does not contain lines of code. It contains encrypted folders with the deeds to a penthouse in Miami Beach and a sprawling villa on Lake Como. It contains brokerage statements for a private fund worth over $200 million. And then, the final, crushing discovery. A folder of unsynced photos. Her husband with another woman on a yacht in Monaco in New York, buying her a sculpture at a gallery he swore was soulless. He was not a struggling coder. He was the heir to a private equity empire. And their entire relationship was a meticulously crafted lie. The reckoning she unleashes in the days that follow is so precise, so devastating, and so deeply gratifying that you will be on the edge of your seat. If you have ever been deceived, taken for granted, or made to feel inadequate by the one person who swore to be your partner, then you have to stick around for this, because the way this woman made him pay is something you will never forget. If you believe revenge is a dish best served cold, hit that like button, share your own stories of getting even in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next, because it's an absolute game changer. Let me show you how the deception began. The city's emergency power hotline felt a million miles away. I was sitting on the floor of our loft at 1 a.m. on January 12th, 2026, with our son kicking a storm inside me. The cold was creeping in through the windows. My husband, Julian, the man who meticulously tracked our budget and was ecstatic when his app hit 1,000 downloads, was not staying in a hostel in Berlin. The geotagged photos on that hard drive proved he was at the Ritz-Carlton in Monaco with a woman named Isabel, and the other files proved he was the sole heir to Croft Holdings, one of the most ruthless private equity firms on Wall Street. My name is Clara Hayes. I am a 33-year-old freelance arts journalist, and for 6 years, I was certain I was married to a man building an ethical career from scratch. This is the story of the most profound betrayal imaginable, and how I engineered a downfall so complete it would dismantle his entire dynasty. Let's rewind to the beginning of the fraud. 6 years ago, I was Clara Hayes, writing for independent magazines in Chicago, passionate about giving a voice to undiscovered artists. Julian Croft was a brilliant coder, new to the city. The story he told was that he came from a powerful family in New York, but he had cut them off. He described his father as a corporate raider who saw businesses as assets to be stripped, not legacies to be built. So, Julian chose his passion, walking away with nothing but his mind, to create technology that actually connected people. He worked day and night from his cluttered desk in our spare room on what he called a decentralized social platform. I would hear the manufactured stress in his voice on calls with supposed angel investors. I proofread his pitch decks for him. I was the one who brought him coffee at 3 a.m. and made sure he remembered to stop and eat. I fell for the idealistic programmer, the man who chose morality over $1 billion inheritance. I was convinced we were about to launch something that would change the world together. About a year into our relationship, he wove a story about a woman from a coding boot camp he had attended. He claimed she only took an interest in his project after a rumor spread about his family's money. Suddenly, my code wasn't a mission. It was an investment opportunity. he told me, his expression a perfect mask of disappointment. I just want someone who believes in the work, Clara, not in a trust fund I left behind. His performance was masterful. It was the ultimate justification for living a life of simplicity. So I cherished our modest lifestyle. We lived in a cozy but small apartment in Wicker Park and shared a beat-up hybrid car. We marked our anniversaries with deep dish pizza from our favorite local spot because fine dining was an extravagance we were saving for one day. I felt an incredible sense of pride in our union, believing our bond was invincible because it was built on shared ideals, not shared assets. I saw myself as the foundation for a visionary who was about to disrupt the entire tech industry. I would boast to my friends that Julian Croft was a genius. He was a man of profound integrity who had rejected a dynasty to pursue a higher purpose. That was the myth he constructed, and I was his most passionate believer. My best friend, Anya, a financial analyst, and my brother, Mark, were the only two who ever seemed to have their doubts. They noticed the small things that didn't quite add up, but I was too blinded by the narrative to see them. I was meticulously managing our budget spreadsheet while he was secretly managing a global investment firm. I just wanted a partner who valued creativity and passion over profit. In September of 2019, I met Julian Croft at an independent art gallery, opening where I was covering the event for a blog. I was interviewing a young sculptor. He was in the crowd, he said later, because he believed art and technology were just different languages for the same creative impulse. He was dressed down in a hoodie and jeans, his focus entirely on the artwork. He seemed thoughtful and genuine. When he approached me after my interview, he asked about the artist's methods, not the potential value of the pieces. I told him I was a journalist, and he said, "That's incredible. I'm just a coder, trying to build something from nothing." He never bragged or tried to impress me with anything but his ideas. We got coffee that night, which turned into a late dinner at a tiny ramen shop. Carefully and with my whole heart, I let myself fall for the man I was sure he was. Of course, I am not completely reckless, Mark insisted, so we used a service for a basic background check. The report came back spotless. Julian Croft had a perfect credit score, 0 debt, and was registered as the founder of a small startup called Nexus Innovations, LLC. Everything seemed perfectly normal, almost boringly so. What I couldn't have known was that Nexus Innovations was a shell corporation, a boutique incubator funded entirely by his family's firm, Croft Holdings. It was his personal multi-million-dollar playground, designed to look and feel like a struggling startup. Every time a tiny seed of doubt tried to grow, I would recall his story about the opportunistic coder, and I would crush it. So I invested my faith in him, and we built what I was certain was an authentic life. For our first anniversary, he took me camping at a state park in Wisconsin. He claimed it was the best he could manage. He made a production of Struggling with the Tent Poles. We ate hot dogs cooked over a tiny portable grill, and he gave me a first edition copy of a science fiction novel we both loved. He looked at me with earnest eyes and said, "This isn't fancy, Clara, but it's ours." I believed him completely. My heart swelled with love because I thought our life was the most real thing I had ever known. I told him, "This is better than any luxury resort. This is everything." He had crafted the perfect illusion of a man with nothing to give but his heart, and I adored him for it. I felt a deep sense of sympathy for him and his constant noble fight. Now I see that camping trip for the elaborate piece of theater it was, a cruel performance designed to keep me happy in my ignorance. While we were shivering in that tent, he probably owned a chain of boutique hotels. The burnt hot dogs were an inside joke that I was not in on. His promise to build a new world for us one day, was the deepest betrayal, because he already commanded a vast one and had simply decided I was not worthy of a place in it. He proposed in July of 2021 on a quiet morning by the Chicago lakefront. He said he could not afford a big spectacle, but he could not stand another day without asking. The ring was a simple, elegant band with a tiny lab-grown diamond. He swore he'd worked with an independent designer for months to get it just right on his shoestring budget. I wept because I thought it was the most heartfelt act of love. I adored that ring, believing it was a symbol of a commitment that money could never buy. The wedding was a simple ceremony at the courthouse, followed by a party with a few friends at our favorite local brewery. Because that was all we could supposedly afford. His mother, Catherine, attended, her disapproval radiating like a cold front. Her toast was a masterpiece of passive aggression, concluding with, "To Julian and Clara, I do hope you appreciate the unconventional choices my son is making to follow his ideals." That first year of our marriage was deceptively normal. Julian was attentive, brilliant, and driven, everything I had ever wanted. We took a cross-country train trip for our honeymoon, staying in coach and living on vending machine snacks. We were building a shared history, and for long stretches, I could almost believe that our life was as simple as it seemed. We were renting that cozy loft, a tiny footprint in a vast city. Julian had no idea that the property management company he sent a check to every month was just one more asset in the massive portfolio he was hiding from me. In 2019, I sank my entire inheritance into his fintech venture, convinced we were building our future together. My whole world revolved around that mission. I'd work from our cramped Austin apartment, editing manuscripts for literary journals, stretching every dollar so he could pursue his dream. Julian always told me his company, Finverse, was perpetually one bad week away from total failure. The truth was, he was taking clandestine meetings with venture capitalists, securing funding rounds worth millions. I genuinely believed we had a partnership founded on absolute trust, the endlessly supportive wife, and the brilliant, struggling innovator. Then, in the heat of early June, 2023, I discovered I was pregnant, and the very ground beneath my feet began to fracture. For weeks, a profound exhaustion had settled deep in my bones, accompanied by a relentless wave of morning sickness. A test from the pharmacy confirmed what I already suspected. My hands trembled as I took 3 more. Every single one displayed a bold, undeniable positive line. I made an appointment with my doctor, and the image on the ultrasound screen stole the breath from my body. "Well, it looks like we have some big news," Dr. Sharma said, her voice kind. "You're expecting twins." My mind went completely blank. Twins. I hadn't even processed the idea of one baby, let alone 2. But then I saw them. 2 tiny flickering lights, 2 impossibly fast heartbeats, and a surge of fierce, protective love washed over me, silencing the panic. I began to weep, a chaotic mix of joy and pure terror. Then her face grew serious. "Now, there is a condition we need to monitor. It's called placenta previa, which means the placenta is positioned over the cervix at the moment. It may correct itself as the pregnancy advances, but for now, you are considered high risk. This means I want you to avoid all forms of stress. No strenuous activity, no demanding work projects, just complete rest." When I told Julian the news that evening, he appeared ecstatic. He pulled me into a tight embrace, kissing me with passion before carefully helping me sit down when I mentioned the doctor's restrictions. "Twins," he whispered, his eyes wide with what I thought was awe. "We're really having twins." Then, a flicker of something else crossed his expression. "Wait, Ellie, How are we going to afford this? The cost of childcare for 2 kids in Austin? It's astronomical. We'll manage, I said, fighting the urge to tell him to pull some money from the company. But I trusted him when he said every last cent was critical for operations. I was afraid my anxiety would sound like I didn't believe in him. So, like always, I buried my financial worries. We shared the news with his business partner, Victoria, a week later at dinner. Julian had insisted on celebrating, choosing a restaurant I knew we couldn't afford. We waited until our main courses were served. So, Victoria, Ellie and I have some major news. We're having twins. The quiet scraping of her fork on the plate stopped. Victoria's smile was thin, sharp. Wow, that's a significant variable. We're over the moon, Julian said, his own grin looking a bit forced. And how, exactly, do you plan to manage the cash flow for 2 children? She asked, her tone completely devoid of warmth. Your personal runway is already non-existent, and the company cannot absorb any more of your personal liabilities. Victoria, Julian began, a warning in his voice. I'm assessing risk, Julian. Childcare in this city runs north of $3,000 a month per child. That's your burn rate before diapers, medical bills, or anything else. Have you stress-tested this scenario at all? We'll figure it out, I said, my voice soft but steady. She aimed her cold stare directly at me. Will you? Will your little editing hobby cover that? Or are you expecting Julian to let the company we have bled for go insolvent to fund you and 2 infants? That's not fair, Julian muttered. What's not fair? Victoria retorted, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register, is derailing your partner's trajectory with a family you are fully aware he cannot support right now. I could feel my cheeks burning. Excuse me? You heard me. The timing is a strategic disaster. You're barely a year into your marriage, and suddenly you're bringing twins into the equation. You planned this. You've created a dependency. Julian shot up from his chair. Victoria, that is enough. Is it? Am I the only one here with the courage to call out the obvious? She saw a genius on the brink of a major breakthrough and decided to anchor him for life. Shaking with a fury I rarely felt, I stood up. I need to go home. Julian rushed out after me. In the ride share, I cried without making a sound as he held my hand. She didn't mean it that way, Ellie. She's just completely stressed about the next funding round. She'll come around. But I knew she meant every syllable, and she had zero intention of coming around. That was merely her opening move. A week after that disastrous dinner, Victoria appeared at our apartment door with 2 sleek suitcases. I'm moving in, she declared, gliding past me into the living room. You're a high-risk liability, Eleanor. You require constant monitoring, and Julian needs to maintain 100% focus on work. This is the optimal solution for everyone. I looked at Julian, my expression pleading with him to object. He just twisted his hands together nervously. Victoria, we didn't talk about this. I'm your COO, Julian. I don't need an invitation to mitigate a threat to our most critical asset. With that, she laid claim to our small home office. That was the start of July, 2023. The next 4 months were an exercise in psychological warfare. She never raised her voice, never made an overt threat. Her approach was more clinical, dismantling my self-worth with the detached precision of a corporate takeover, and Julian didn't even see it happening. First, she took control of our space. All this visual clutter is creating a stressful environment, darling. Let me help you streamline. She got rid of my favorite snacks from the pantry, labeling them inflammatory, and had keto meal kits delivered instead. She took over all the cooking. Then, she targeted my work. You shouldn't be experiencing screen fatigue in your delicate condition. She began insisting on assisting with my client correspondence. hinting that I was too emotionally volatile to manage professional relationships. She started going through our mail. "Just trying to organize the invoices for you," she would say brightly, before asking pointed questions about our finances. "Why is Julian's name not on the lease with yours? From a legal standpoint, that's a huge liability." I told her I'd signed it before we got married, and we just never got around to updating it. Her smile was cold. "What is it you're trying to shield, Eleanor?" "Nothing. I just handle the household administration." "How inefficient," she'd murmur, just loud enough for Julian to overhear. "Most successful partnerships operate with full financial transparency." She began screening my calls. "Eleanor is resting," she would inform my friends. My small editing business, the one thing that was entirely mine, began to wither as my clients found me unreachable. My autonomy was being systematically dismantled. She watched my food intake like an auditor. "That's an excessive amount of carbohydrates. You're inviting gestational diabetes." "A second portion? Remember, you are building 2 humans, not eating for 3. I was hungry all the time, but became anxious about even entering my own kitchen. She turned my pregnant body into a topic for daily review. "Your face seems to be retaining water." "Be careful, Eleanor. The weight gained during a twin pregnancy can be nearly impossible to lose postpartum." I was only 18 weeks along, and she was already making me feel ashamed of the miracle my body was performing. But the isolation was her most effective weapon. She would meet my sister at the door. Now isn't an optimal time. Eleanor needs a zero-stimulus environment. When my friend Maya tried to stop by, Victoria told her I was unwell and wasn't accepting guests. Maya sent me a text moments later. "Are you okay? Your husband's business partner is acting like a gatekeeper from hell." I lied in my reply. "I'm fine, just so tired. I'll call you tomorrow." I didn't. Victoria was always there, her presence a constant, silent surveillance. Sometime in August, during my 4th month, I felt Julian slipping through my fingers. The warmth in his gaze was replaced by a guarded skepticism. He stopped reaching for me. He started sleeping on the couch. "You need the space to get comfortable," he claimed. But his tone was hollow. I would hear them murmuring late into the night, their quiet voices carrying from the kitchen. Victoria would say things like, "I'm just pointing out the data, Julian. It's a blind spot. She controls all the household cash flow. She's opaque about her own income. And the pregnancy occurred at the most high-stakes moment for the company. Ellie isn't calculating like that. And she gets so defensive about her work. Does it not strike you as odd that you have zero visibility into her earnings? She has nothing to hide from me." Then why the resistance to adding you to the lease? What kind of partner maintains financial firewalls from their own husband? His sister, Chloe, who had always been so sweet to me, began to call with concerns, clearly fed a curated list of Victoria's talking points. "I'm just worried about you, Julian," she would say, echoing lines about financial pressure and Eleanor's supposed emotional instability. "It seems like Eleanor has you on a very short leash. What if this little world she's built for you two isn't what it seems?" I finally confronted Julian one evening. "Victoria is turning everyone against me." "She's just trying to protect the company." "Protect it from what? I have done nothing wrong." "Then why are you so secretive about our finances? Victoria is an expert in financial modeling, and she says your household budget is completely inefficient. Just let her help streamline it." "Because it's my domain, and I'm entitled to some privacy." "Partnerships shouldn't have secrets, Ellie." "I'm not keeping secrets. I'm maintaining a boundary." But he no longer saw the distinction. He became increasingly distant, working later and later, until we were nothing more than roommates, sharing a high-risk pregnancy. Arthur was a ghost in his own home, leaving before dawn and returning after midnight. By early October, a knot of suspicion had tightened in my gut. Sienna, his brilliant new protégé, was a constant presence on his phone, their texts buzzing in a heavily encrypted app. He'd duck into his home office for hushed calls about seed funding and market penetration. I knew he wasn't just mentoring her. He was orchestrating a secret world behind my back. I finally asked him, "What is Sienna's project really about?" He refused to meet my gaze. "It's a complex valuation. You wouldn't understand." One evening, I was setting up our new integrated smart home system, and my tablet died. I grabbed Arthur's from the charger. While syncing his calendar, a notification from a mapping app I'd never heard of slid across the screen. It had a discreet platinum logo. The message said, "GeoLux. Your custom geofence for the Seraphim property is now active." My heart went still. "Seraphim?" I tapped the notification. It demanded biometric authentication. My hand trembled as I pressed Arthur's thumbprint, which he'd registered on all our devices, to the sensor. The screen opened, not to a map, but to a portfolio of luxury properties. And there it was, a penthouse in Pacific Heights, purchased 3 weeks ago for $7 million by a shell corporation. "What is Seraphim Holdings, Arthur?" I confronted him that night. "Your latest investment isn't just an investment, is it?" He stiffened, a cornered look in his eyes. "Have you been spying on me?" "I'm your wife, Arthur. I'm carrying your child. That should be all the reason you need to be honest with me." "Then trust me. Stop digging into my business dealings." "No." "And why is that?" "Because the second I mentioned the penthouse, he would know I had found his secret. The brilliant, driven man I married would vanish, replaced by a liar. My silence was my confession, and he saw it all over my face. October 3rd, 2024. I was 7 months along, 30 weeks pregnant. I remember the date because it was the day my world started to fracture. At my checkup, Dr. Evans frowned at the blood pressure cuff. "Chloe, this is too high. It's the first sign of preeclampsia. I need you to eliminate all stress and start taking it easy. Immediately. Any major anxiety could be very risky." My husband, Arthur, was barely listening. "Reduce stress," he said later, tapping through a presentation on his phone. "Perfect. You've been looking for an excuse to binge-watch that new series." That afternoon, the advanced smart bassinet we'd ordered was delivered in a huge, awkward box. "The concierge just called. It's downstairs," he said, grabbing his laptop bag. "I have a last-minute pitch with Sienna. Can you handle it?" "Arthur, I can't. The doctor said no lifting, no exertion." "Chloe, for heaven's sake, you have high blood pressure. You're not an invalid. Don't be so dramatic." With that, Arthur was gone. His star protégé, Sienna, however, was not. She appeared at our door an hour later, holding a tablet with a deck of slides. She swept past me toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, her gaze sweeping across our apartment with a chilling air of appraisal. "Arthur said I'd find you here," she said, her tone a perfect blend of condescension and concern. A sudden, sharp cramp seized my abdomen, and I gasped. I was standing near the open sliding door to our glass-railed balcony. That's when Sienna stepped closer, invading my space. "He needs these projections reviewed. You know, he worries about you. Says the pregnancy has made you so fragile." She leaned in, and her shoulder rammed into mine, a deliberate, forceful shove that sent me stumbling sideways. The city skyline spun. My hand shot out, my fingers barely closing around the cool metal of the balcony railing. For one terrifying second, I was swaying over a 40-story drop to the street below. My baby. Our unborn son was almost... I clung to the railing, my breathing ragged. Sienna stood there, her face a flawless performance of shock. "Oh my God, Chloe, are you all right? I'm so sorry. You need to be more careful. You've been so clumsy these last few months." But her eyes were flat, cold, and shining with a flicker of triumph. She did it on purpose. She had tried to knock me off balance. She was trying to harm my child. "You—" The word was a strangled whisper. "What?" "It was a complete accident. Honestly, Chloe, maybe you shouldn't stand so close to an open balcony in your condition." That night, the contractions began, hard and relentless. Arthur rushed me to UCSF Medical Center. I was petrified. 30 weeks. It was terrifyingly premature. "Please, not yet," I begged the universe. Dr. Evans' face was grim as she monitored me. "Your son's heart rate is stable, but the stress has triggered preterm labor. You are in a high-risk category. From now on, it is mandatory. Strict bed rest. No work, no stress, no excuses." After we got home, I told Arthur exactly what Sienna had done. "She bumped into you, Chloe. It happens." "No." She looked at me. "It was a push, Arthur." "You're being hysterical." "I'm pregnant, and your protege just tried to endanger your son." He exhaled, raking a hand through his hair. "Sienna would never. Why are you inventing these scenarios? You likely just lost your footing. You need to accept that you're not as steady on your feet right now." I stared at my husband, desperate to find a trace of belief, of loyalty. He wouldn't even look at me. Later that night, as I lay alone, the familiar chill of dread settled over me. And then, I stopped crying. I pulled out the encrypted laptop I used for my old data analysis work and logged in. "I need to get into the venture fund's financials," I whispered. "I need to see where the money is really going. I have to map out the entire network," I murmured, "and I need to do it before he realizes what I'm looking for." The next day, Arthur left for a fintech summit in Singapore. As soon as the door closed, I began my data deep dive. Using a security key I knew he kept in his desk, I gained access to his firm's servers, investor reports, and offshore accounts. There were no hidden cameras, no secret microphones, just me, my analytical skills, and the dawning horror that my entire marriage was a fraud. From then on, every wire transfer, every calendar invite, every encrypted message was a data point. I was building a case. By mid-November, I was entering my third trimester. Trapped in our apartment, I endured Arthur's texts, filled with patronizing advice. "Your doctor is being overly cautious," he would type. "You should get out for some fresh air." One afternoon, Arthur's co-founder, Liam, came by to drop off some paperwork. He found me on the sofa, tears streaming down my face from the loneliness and the constant ache in my back. I was 34 weeks pregnant and felt like I was in a gilded cage. Liam sat down hesitantly. "Chloe, what's happening? You seem broken." I looked at him, my composure shattering. "Then help me. Please, tell me what is really going on with Arthur." "I've seen it," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "I see how he is with her, with Sienna. It's out of control." A small, fragile hope bloomed in my chest. "Will you speak to him? Will you make him stop?" "I will," he swore. "I'm going to fix this." I actually believed him. For the first time in months, I felt sane, vindicated that someone else recognized the truth. The next day, Liam met with Arthur at their office on Sand Hill Road. I stared at my phone for hours, my insides twisted in knots, praying the ordeal was finally over. That night, Arthur walked in, his expression a thundercloud of fury. "Did you actually think you could manipulate my own partner against me?" "What? No, I just wanted—" "Liam told me everything. How you've been fabricating stories about Sienna, trying to destabilize the firm, trying to sabotage my most promising investment." My blood turned to ice. "That is not what I said. I was scared." Liam doesn't lie to me, Chloe, but you do. You've been paranoid and deceitful this whole time. Liam had betrayed me. He had run straight to Arthur and Sienna, warned them I was suspicious, and they had flipped the narrative, casting me as the hysterical, jealous wife. Later, I saw a forwarded email from Liam to Arthur. He wouldn't take my calls. Why? I messaged him. His reply came moments later. I'm sorry, Arthur controls my entire net worth. Sienna's company is his obsession. If I crossed him, he would have ruined me. He promised to blacklist me from every VC firm in the Bay Area. I couldn't. I'm sorry. He was gone, and I understood with chilling certainty that I was utterly alone. No one would help me. Not Arthur, not his allies. To survive this and protect my son, I would have to save myself. My own hunt for data had hit a wall. After my plea to Liam, Arthur had implemented a new layer of security on all his accounts. The digital trail vanished. He thought he had cut me off. He couldn't find a single log of my activities, of course, because I had routed my access through anonymous proxies. I was the perfect, isolated, pregnant wife. I overheard him on a video call with Sienna one afternoon, his voice sharp and low, echoing from the smart display he'd left on. She's on to something. She's playing dumb, but she knows. There was a brief silence. Keep searching. She had to have left a digital footprint. Nobody's that clean. But I was, or rather, the woman they thought they knew, Chloe the trusting homemaker, was meek and oblivious. In late November, at 36 weeks, I discovered a deleted audio file on our home network drive that made my breath catch. It was Arthur, Sienna, and Liam. Chloe's digital snooping has turned up nothing, Liam was saying. Maybe she's finally given up. Or maybe, Sienna's voice replied, as cold and clear as glass. She's just collecting the evidence she needs to burn us to the ground. Ethan needs a clean break, something that makes him the victim here, Cassandra insisted. What are you even saying? Ethan asked, his voice strained. What if, Cassandra began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, we gave the public a reason for him to leave? Cassie, this is insane, he shot back, but his tone held a flicker of interest. She pressed on. I'm talking about securing your legacy, Ethan, no matter what it takes. A wave of nausea washed over me. They were plotting to destroy me, but the exact method was still a horrifying mystery. I should have thrown my things in a suitcase that instant, called my brother, and driven until I ran out of gas. But I was 32 weeks pregnant, and the sheer terror of triggering early labor kept my feet glued to the floor. I was paralyzed by the thought of the custody fight to come, petrified that if I fled, it would only validate the story they were about to create, that I was erratic and untrustworthy. So I stayed, and it was the most catastrophic mistake I ever made. Cassandra had a contact from her past in corporate intelligence, a hacker who went by the name Silas, a man with a deep-seated vendetta against a rival tech giant. He was a ghost online, morally bankrupt, and available for the right price. It wasn't until I was already ensnared in their trap that I understood Cassandra had paid him $250,000 to construct a flawless, fabricated digital history proving I was leaking company secrets. Silas was an artist of deception. He created a series of encrypted communication channels that seemed to originate from my old, rarely used laptop from my reporting days. Leveraging his expertise in corporate espionage, he fabricated a trail of leaked documents, feeding sensitive data from Ethan's portfolio companies to a notorious tech gossip blog. He then created a convincing, though completely fake, series of emails between myself and a journalist at a competing publication, discussing the terms of the leak. They bought a brand new, unregistered smartphone and hid it in the lining of my gym bag, loaded with manufactured messages between me and a fictional source at the rival firm, alluding to payoffs. To seal the deal, they funneled $50,000 through a series of crypto tumblers into my personal savings account, making it appear as if it were the first installment for my betrayal. It was an elaborate, cruel, and perfectly sealed narrative designed to obliterate my credibility and guarantee that I would lose not just my husband, but my baby as well. On December 18th, at 36 weeks pregnant, I was perpetually exhausted, swollen, and aching. My son felt like he was practicing martial arts on my ribs. I could barely walk from our bedroom to the kitchen without needing to rest. Ethan walked into our bedroom that evening, clutching his phone. His expression was a chilling canvas of betrayal and profound disappointment. "We have to talk. Right now." "I'm so exhausted, Ethan," I murmured. "Now, Maya." He didn't yell. He never had to. He sat on the foot of the bed and angled the phone's screen toward me, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he were handling radioactive material. Ethan stared at the screen. "My head of security forwarded me this article an hour ago." A frantic, heavy pulse started hammering in my ears. "He found a few things I think you need to account for." He showed me the display. It wasn't a private message or a photo. It was a published article on a major tech news site. It was filled with screenshots of encrypted emails, offshore bank records, and server data. It was a perfect public exposé on corporate espionage. "What am I looking at?" I whispered, my throat tight and dry. "This," Cassandra announced, her voice like ice, "is an article detailing your little side project. You've been selling my partner's intellectual property to his biggest competitor." "That's not true. It's a lie." I moved toward Ethan's business partner, my hands shaking uncontrollably. "There's more," Ethan said, his voice flat and empty. He held up his own phone, showing a different screen, a security report from his tech team. "It's a full analysis of the data leak." "I've never seen that report. I don't know anything about that." "Our head of cybersecurity traced the origin of the leak," Ethan said, his eyes glued to the phone. "The initial data packet was sent from our home network, from your laptop, the one you use for your online prenatal yoga classes. I was in my yoga class. This is a complete fabrication. Somebody has set me up." "An anonymous source inside Omni Capital already confirmed the story," Cassandra added, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "They told the reporter they'd been receiving proprietary data for months." The room started to tilt and sway. Every single detail had been flawlessly engineered. It was an airtight, beautiful lie, a masterpiece of deceit. "Ethan, you have to believe me," I pleaded, reaching for him. He flinched away as if my touch was electric. "Don't. Just stop. They're fakes, every last one of them. If you would just let an independent analyst look at them—" "I had my own team look at them," he interrupted, his voice hollow. "I saw everything. The encrypted messages, the wire transfer, the network logs. It's all there, Maya." "It's a frame job," I screamed, my voice breaking. "Your partner is framing me. She hired someone to ruin our marriage so she could have you to herself." "Oh, listen to yourself," Cassandra said, with a dismissive wave of her hand. "You're becoming hysterical, utterly paranoid. The hormones must be clouding your mind." "I am not paranoid. This is a setup." Ethan wouldn't look at me. "I'm arranging for a paternity test," he said, his voice as brittle as glass. "The minute the baby is born. Until I see proof that he is mine, you are to stay away from me." My heart shattered. "He is your son." He finally met my gaze, his eyes filled with a cold, devastating doubt. "Is he?" That question filled the room like a toxic gas. In that single moment, Ethan, I didn't recognize myself, and I certainly didn't recognize you. He spun around and walked out of our San Francisco penthouse. His partner, Cassandra, gave me a small, victorious smirk. Ethan's chief of staff, Richard, simply stared at the polished hardwood floor. And I was left alone, 36 weeks pregnant with his child, branded as a liar, a corporate saboteur, and an adulterer. Proving my innocence was impossible because the evidence, doctored emails detailing a lucrative deal with a rival venture capitalist, was impeccable. That night I sent an encrypted text to Ben, my best friend from Stanford. I'm in serious trouble. I need a safe house, a private security detail, and divorce proceedings initiated before the market opens tomorrow. I can have it all arranged in 48 hours, he texted back. Make it 24, I replied. I hastily packed a small overnight bag with essentials and hid it in the spare tire compartment of my SUV. The plan was simple. The following day, Ethan and Cassandra were scheduled to attend an exclusive overnight tech summit in Napa Valley. It was the industry event of the season. I would just have to wait for them to leave, drive south to Los Angeles, and meet up with Ben and my brother David at a secure rental property. I could have the baby there, a world away from this waking nightmare. I just needed to survive one more night. On Sunday, October 3rd, I heard them getting ready for their trip. I remained in the master bedroom, listening intently until I heard the sound of their chauffeured car pulling away. I gave it a full 15 minutes, just to be safe, then grabbed my wallet, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had almost made it to the private elevator when I saw our housekeeper, Elena, standing by the door. My blood ran cold. I thought you had the night off. Ms. Vance asked me to stay. Her tone was strange, guarded, and in her hand, she was holding my overnight bag, the one from my vehicle. I found this when I was dusting the garage. Were you going somewhere, Mrs. Sterling? Cassandra emerged from the doorway of the living room, with Ethan just a step behind her. They hadn't gone to Napa. The entire thing was a performance, a trap. Trying to run away? Cassandra asked, her voice sharp and cruel. You were actually going to steal that baby and vanish, weren't you? He is my baby. A judge will decide that, Ethan said coldly, already dialing his legal team on his phone. Cassandra took my handbag from my shoulder, pulling out my phone, car keys, and wallet. You won't have any use for these, she said, not until a paternity test proves who that child belongs to. And if he isn't Ethan's, you will walk out of here with absolutely nothing. They escorted me down the hall to the self-contained guest wing. It was minimalist, stylish, and completely isolating. They had recently updated it with a smart lock system that they controlled from their phones. This is for your own protection, Cassandra said, her voice dripping with fake concern. You're obviously not well, attempting to flee with a child that might not even be a Sterling. We're just making sure you don't do something to harm yourself or the baby. The heavy steel-lined door slid closed. The electronic lock chirped. I was a prisoner, 36 weeks pregnant, confined to a luxurious cell with zero connection to the outside world. I slid down the wall onto the cold marble floor as the full weight of my situation came crashing down. They were going to hold me here until I delivered my baby. Then they would take my son and throw me away like trash. There was absolutely nothing I could do. This was the absolute bottom of my despair. I was completely and utterly trapped. On October 10th, at 2 a.m, now 37 weeks into my pregnancy, I was jolted awake by a sharp, relentless pain. It was time. These were not false contractions. They were 5 minutes apart and intensifying with every wave. I had been having Braxton Hicks contractions for weeks. This was the real thing. I was locked in a guest suite, about to give birth entirely on my own. I pounded on the soundproofed windows, my screams swallowed by the thick glass. Help. Somebody please, the baby is coming. The main part of the penthouse remained dark and still on the other side of the door. I screamed until my voice was gone, beating my fists against the wood. "Please, I am in labor!" Finally, the intercom on the wall sputtered to life. Cassandra's annoyed voice echoed into the room. "Stop the theatrics, Maya. You're not due for 3 more weeks. The contractions are only 5 minutes apart. The baby is coming now. It's just false labor. You'll be fine. Just have some chamomile tea." "I am not okay." Another wave of intense pressure seized my body, and I collapsed, crying out in pain. The intercom went silent for a moment, followed by a soft chime as she terminated the connection. Victoria had just left me. I don't know how long I lay on that cold marble floor. Time blurred into a horrifying cocktail of agony, terror, and the dawning, awful truth that my babies and I might not make it through this. No one would even know we were gone. It was almost 2 a.m. when I remembered the burner phone I had stashed in a vanity drawer. It had no cell plan, but it might be able to find the penthouse's Wi-Fi. I dragged myself across the floor, my body trembling with contractions that were now just a couple of minutes apart. I found the old phone, powered it on, and miraculously connected to the unsecured service network. I opened a browser and found an emergency chat line. "I'm 38 weeks pregnant with twins. It's a high-risk pregnancy. I'm in labor and locked inside a smart penthouse. I can't get out. The address is 1000 Summit Drive, Atherton. Please, send help fast." I tapped send, praying with everything I had that it would reach someone. 20 minutes later, a lifetime of agony, I heard the distant sound of sirens winding their way up the hill. Then, a loud, insistent banging on the building's main doors far below. "Paramedics! SFPD! Open the door!" I could hear Victoria's voice over the building intercom, dripping with condescension. "Officers, I can assure you, you've been misled by a prank caller." A firefighter's voice boomed back, cutting her off. "We received a digital distress call from this residence. A woman in labor. Where is she?" There was more yelling than the sound of running. My apartment door was pried open. 2 paramedics froze in the doorway, their eyes widening at the sight of me. 38 weeks, pregnant, on a cold marble floor, deep into labor, and sobbing hysterically. "Oh my God," one of them whispered. "How long have you been trapped in here?" "Hours," I gasped, as another contraction ripped through me. "Ma'am, we're getting you to Stanford Medical right now." They gently moved me to a gurney. As they wheeled me out, I saw Julian's family watching from the terrace. Victoria and his sister, Beatrice, stood there in their silk loungewear, looking utterly annoyed. Victoria attempted to reason with a police officer. "She has emotional episodes. We were simply giving her some quiet time." "You locked a pregnant woman in her apartment?" the officer asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "While she was giving birth?" One of the paramedics shot a venomous look at Beatrice. "As soon as she's stable, we're calling Child Protective Services. This is felony endangerment." Beatrice's face turned ashen. At Stanford Medical, after nearly a full day of brutal labor, Julian finally made an appearance, staring intently at his phone. "Are you seriously managing a product launch right now?" my delivery nurse asked him, completely stunned. "This is a critical phase," he replied, his voice cold as ice. "After this is over, we're collecting the DNA samples, immediately." I was in too much pain to protest. Another contraction stole my breath. "Do you need me to leave?" he asked, clearly put out. "Yes," I managed to say. "Go." And he did. He never came back. At 1 a.m. on October 11th, my son Leo was born, weighing 6 pounds, 3 ounces. At 1:06, his brother Finn arrived, 5 pounds, 15 ounces. They were both absolutely perfect. I clutched them to my chest, my face soaked with tears. They were so small, so perfect, so completely and utterly mine. "Hello, my beautiful boys," I whispered. "Hello. I'm your mama. I am so sorry. I am so sorry for what you've already been through. But I have you now. Mama's got you. And I promise you both, I will always, always keep you safe." The nurse asked if I wanted to call anyone. "My husband was here," I said softly. "He had to go back to work." "Oh." Her face was a portrait of sympathy. "I'm so sorry, honey. Is there anyone else? A friend? Your mother?" I thought of my best friend, Clara, but my main phone was still locked in Julian's fortress of a penthouse. They had isolated me completely. "No," I whispered, gazing down at my sons. "It's just us." And that's how I found myself in a sterile suite at a private hospital, holding my newborn sons. The room was cold and quiet, no celebratory balloons, no congratulatory flowers, and definitely no family. It was just me and my boys, a small new unit against a very big and hostile world. I spent 4 days there, recovering from the emergency C-section. Leo and Finn were healthy, but their low birth weights required observation. Julian's sister, Beatrice, showed up on the second day. She breezed in, glanced at the infants in their clear plastic bassinets, and remarked, "They have the Davenport eyes." She then added, "That's a small mercy, I suppose. We are, of course, still proceeding with a genetic confirmation." She never laid a hand on them, never asked for their names, never said congratulations. She was gone in under 5 minutes. A text from a so-called friend, Chloe, pinged on the hospital's tablet. "Heard the new heirs have landed. Hope you and the new acquisitions are doing well." A winking emoji followed. Julian himself appeared on the third day, a perfect picture of detached indifference. He stopped just inside the door, his eyes landing on his sons. "Have they been designated?" he asked. "Leo and Finn." He gave a short, sharp nod. "Adequate names." A heavy silence filled the space between us. "Julian, please, don't be like this." "The psychiatric observation will commence upon your return home," he said, his voice completely flat. "Until the doctors have certified your stability, I refuse to form an attachment to potential liabilities." He turned and walked out. A hospital social worker came by later that afternoon. "Mrs. Davenport, I have to ask, do you feel safe in your home?" I wanted to scream, "No." I wanted to tell her about the penthouse, the biometric locks, the constant audio surveillance, the psychological games, every last bit of it. But to say it out loud would launch a formal investigation. They could put my babies into foster care while they tried to unravel the intricate web my powerful husband had created. I could not stand the thought of being separated from them, so I lied. "Yes, I'm perfectly safe. It's just a very high-stress family dynamic." Her gaze stayed on my face, full of skepticism. She knew I wasn't telling her everything, but she had nothing concrete to act on. "If your situation changes, here is the number for a women's shelter." I took the card she offered, slipping it into my bag, with a quiet thank you. When she was gone, the crushing silence returned. On day 4, October 10th, we were discharged. I called the penthouse. "I'm ready to be picked up." Beatrice answered the phone. "We're in the middle of a dinner with our venture capital partners. You'll need to arrange your own transportation." "I just had major surgery. I have 2 newborn babies with me. I can't handle a car service by myself." The line went dead. I ordered an uber-black SUV. The driver, a man with gentle eyes, helped me click the infant carriers I'd had delivered into their bases. I sat in the back, my twin sons beside me, the raw pain from my incision stabbing with every bump in the road, taking a rideshare home to a life that was no longer my own. As we drove through the gates of our Atherton estate, the sprawling glass-walled mansion was completely dark. Not a single light was on. The driver looked back, his brow creased with worry. "Are you certain you'll be okay, ma'am?" I'll be fine, thank you. He helped me carry my sons to the massive front door. I gave him the last bit of cash I had, and as his car disappeared down the long, winding driveway, I stepped back into my beautiful prison. Nothing had been prepared. The nursery, designed by a famous architect with smart glass walls that overlooked the bay, was still an empty space. The high-tech bassinets were in their shipping crates, propped against a wall. There was no welcome home, no offer of help, not another person in sight. I set the car seats down in the middle of the vast, empty living room. It felt like the only safe place, and started the impossible job of putting the cribs together myself. 10 days after major surgery, my stitches pulling with every movement, dizzy from blood loss. It took me 3 miserable hours. I wept silently the entire time. That first night was a nightmare of feedings every 90 minutes. My attempts to breastfeed were a painful disaster. They were too small to latch properly, and their hungry cries echoed through the silent, empty house. I was exhausted, alone, and in constant, throbbing pain. Beatrice appeared in the nursery doorway at 6 in the morning. "You have to make them stop that noise," she said, her gaze fixed somewhere down the hall. "You're disturbing Julian's sleep." "I'm not making noise. The babies are hungry. I'm trying to feed them." "Then be more effective at it," she said coldly. "And when you're done, the kitchen is a mess. The caterers from last night's investor dinner left it in a state. I just had a C-section." My mother-in-law, Victoria, who had appeared behind her, gave a dismissive laugh. "Women of my background were running multinational corporations the day after giving birth. Stop being so delicate." She turned and glided away, leaving me with my sons and the horrifying knowledge that they expected me to do it all: manage the twins, the estate, and the family's endless social calendar, while recovering from major surgery and barely able to stand. Having no other choice, I did as I was told. The next few days were a blur of exhaustion and pain. On the second day, while trying to make breakfast for the family, with a screaming Leo in my arms, a sharp, hot pain erupted from my incision. I was terrified it was getting infected. On the third day, Beatrice stormed past the nursery, allowing the heavy, soundproof door to slam shut with a deafening thud. Just as I'd managed to get both my newborns to finally fall asleep, they startled awake, screaming. When I shot her a pleading glance, she gave me a tight, icy smile. Oh dear, I had no idea they were sleeping. On the fourth day, I spent a solid 30 minutes hooked up to a breast pump just to get enough for a single feeding. I'd barely placed the 2 small bottles on the marble countertop when Isabella swept into the kitchen, grabbed them, and emptied them into the sink. "Oh, what a shame. So clumsy of me," she said, her tone a mockery of concern. I could only stare in shock. "That took me an hour. Well, I suppose you'd better start over then. Or perhaps it's time to give up, since your access to the family funds for things like baby formula is, shall we say, under review." She glided out of the room, humming contentedly. On the 5th day, I was out of diapers, and I asked Julian to grab a box on his way home from a meeting in the financial district. He never showed up, sending a text that a server migration had gone critical. I was left with no choice but to cut up swaddling blankets for them until I could finally get to a store myself the following day. By the 6th day, the incision from my C-section was grotesquely infected, a searing, crimson line across my lower belly. I knew I needed antibiotics, and fast. I told his mother, Eleanor, about it, and she just waved her hand dismissively. "That's just the anxiety of being a new mother, Elena. There's no need for such theatrics." By the 7th day, I hadn't had more than 45 consecutive minutes of sleep in a week. I began to hallucinate, catching fleeting shadows in the corners of my eyes. I dropped a glass bottle, and it exploded across the polished floor. I just stood there, gazing at the glittering shards, my mind a complete blank. Julian walked in. "Could you have one of the housekeepers attend to that? It's a tripping hazard." I gazed at this man, a man who had my husband's face but was utterly unrecognizable to me, and a deep, chilling numbness washed through my entire body. On the 8th day, which was October 17th, at 3 o'clock in the morning, I found myself in the au pair wing. They had relocated me there, stating that the infants were causing too much of a disruption, to the main part of the penthouse. I was attempting to feed Leo while Max screamed from his bassinet. The infection from my surgery had become a raging inferno. My temperature had climbed to 103 degrees. I was shaking uncontrollably, disoriented, and barely conscious. Both of my sons were crying, and I had no memory of the last time I'd had a sip of water, or a bite of food, or any real rest. My gaze drifted to the balcony off the third-floor suite, to the dense, churning fog rolling in from the Boston harbor. I noticed the simple latch on the glass doors. It would take all of 10 seconds. The idea was a seductive whisper in its simplicity. Just open the doors, step outside, lie down with my babies, and let go. A final end to this horrific, waking dream. The three of us, finally at rest, far from this cold, heartless place. Max was crying. Leo was crying. I was crying. The world was nothing but pain. The world was impossible. My hand was just reaching for the handle when Max fell silent. He stared right at me with his impossibly wide blue eyes, Julian's eyes, and then he let out a tiny, contented gurgle. In that single moment, something inside of me didn't simply break. It shattered and was instantly reforged into solid steel. "No," I whispered into the quiet room. "No, Mommy is not quitting. Mommy is going to fight. Mommy is getting us out of this place." I summoned the very last ounce of my energy to bang on the locked door, connecting to the main residence, for a full 20 minutes, screaming and pounding until my knuckles were raw and bleeding. Finally, Isabella yanked the door open, her face a perfect portrait of irritation. "What is all of this noise about?" And then her eyes landed on me. She saw the feverish glaze in my eyes, the slick sheen of sweat covering my skin, the fresh blood that had soaked through the front of my nightgown, and the shrieking baby in my arms. For a single, unguarded second, she actually appeared frightened. "I need a doctor. The infection. I think I'm dying. Please." She called Eleanor, who in turn called their private physician, but she described the situation as, "My daughter-in-law is having a bit of a hysterical fit over some post-surgical discomfort, but for the sake of the children, you should probably come see her." The doctor arrived, and after one look at my condition, he immediately called for a private ambulance. In the emergency room, the attending physician was appalled. "Your incision is septic. You have a systemic blood infection. You are hours away from dying. Who has been in charge of your post-operative care?" I was just not processing anything clearly. "You have been through a major operation. Where is your husband? Where is your family?" A patient advocate from the hospital came to my room. "Mrs. Davenport, this situation is incredibly troubling. We are seeing signs of severe postpartum neglect. I am obligated to ask you, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is anyone in your home causing you harm?" I looked down at my sons, who were sleeping soundly in their hospital bassinet, and I considered what telling the truth would really mean. Child Protective Services, a vicious custody war, a public trial by fire in the media. It was impossible, so I told a lie. I haven't been taking very good care of myself. I'll do much better, I swear." She clearly didn't believe a single word I said, but she didn't have any evidence. They flooded my system with intravenous antibiotics for 18 hours, cleaned and rebandaged the wound, and gave me strict instructions to get some rest. And then they discharged me. Back to the penthouse, back to the isolated au pair wing, back to my own private hell. I had 2 days remaining before my entire life was scheduled for demolition. 2 more days of the most perfectly engineered cruelty I could ever have conceived. I was utterly oblivious to the fact that things were about to become exponentially, catastrophically worse. On November 3rd, the 9th day of my son's lives, Sophia Rossi, the rival tech investor Julian had been meeting with, made her final, devastating play. Using a contact in the cybersecurity world, she had commissioned a series of brilliantly convincing digital forgeries. There were fabricated screenshots of emails, supposedly sent from me to an unknown lover via a secure server. There were falsified records of large, untraceable wire transfers from an offshore account opened in my name. But the crown jewel, the most poisonous part of her plan, was a flawlessly executed deepfake audio file. Sophia had used cutting-edge AI to clone my voice, then layered it over a silent security footage of me having coffee, making it sound as if I was selling corporate secrets and planning to leave Julian for a competing executive. The final product was seamless, ingenious, and designed to obliterate me completely. Eleanor presented this portfolio of betrayal to Julian in his study that evening. I was unaware, sequestered in the nursery with the twins, desperate for a few moments of uninterrupted sleep. Julian watched the footage and listened to the audio. His face went from stunned disbelief to a dark, angry flush to a serene and terrifying calm that was far more unnerving than any explosion of rage. "I want her out, tonight!" Even his mother seemed taken aback for a moment. "Julian, it's the middle of the night. I want her out of this penthouse, now, her, and those 2 infants, who are clearly not my sons. Dearest, we have to approach this strategically. I don't care about strategy. I want her gone before I do something I'll regret for the rest of my life." Isabella then sent the audio file to a contact at Sophia's investment firm, their supposed witness, who immediately provided a sworn affidavit confirming he had personally overheard me discussing the sale of proprietary algorithms on 6 different occasions. They had their narrative. It was completely sealed. It was a total fiction, but Julian was desperate for any reason to believe it. Believing I was a traitor was so much easier than facing the possibility that his own family was systematically destroying an innocent woman. I was burping Max while Leo slept when the nursery door was slammed open. The entire Davenport family stood there, silhouetted against the hall light. Julian, Eleanor, Isabella, and Arthur, their father. Their faces were all hardened into the same mask of cold, shared contempt. My heart started hammering against my ribcage like a frantic, caged animal. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. Isabella spoke first, holding out a tablet like a prosecutor, presenting evidence. "It's finished, Elena. We know what you've done. We have irrefutable proof." She played the video. It was me, on the screen, but it was my voice, speaking words I'd never said. It was a twisted, monstrous version of me, admitting to betrayals I had never conceived of, professing a love for a man I didn't even know. That isn't real. That's an AI voice clone. It's been faked. Eleanor let out a piercing shriek. "Liar! We have a signed affidavit. We have the offshore bank statements. We know you've been selling my son's trade secrets since the day you married him." Isabella aimed a trembling finger toward my sons. "And those infants, they aren't even Davenport's. You brought another man's bastards into our home. You managed to deceive all of us." Julian's face was a mask of ice, completely unreadable. "I'm having a paternity test arranged, first thing in the morning." Julian, please, you have to believe me. This is a setup. Someone is framing me. Eleanor laughed, a harsh, ugly bark. Oh, of course. A massive, intricate conspiracy against a nobody from the art world. Or is it simply more likely that you're just a common cheating grifter? Arthur stepped into the room, his voice dangerously low. Julian, son, perhaps this can wait for the lawyers in the morning. No, Julian said, his voice absolute. She is leaving this home, tonight. I clutched Max tighter and shifted toward the bassinet, where Leo was beginning to stir. It's past midnight. There's a nor'easter starting outside. They're newborn babies. They're your sons. Please, Julian, no matter what you believe I did, don't punish them for it. Isabella moved toward the bassinet. Perhaps the children ought to stay here. We'll proceed with the DNA test. If they carry the Davenport name, this is their rightful home. You, on the other hand, must leave. A sudden sharp terror, colder and more intense than any physical pain, gripped me. They were actually going to try to take my babies. No. I quickly lifted Leo from his bassinet, holding both of my sons in my arms as if they were a shield. You will not put a hand on either of them. They are my children. Eleanor's face contorted into a mask of pure fury. They are nothing. They are the evidence of your disgusting infidelity. Get them out of my house. Out. She actually lunged toward me, her nails dug into my arms like talons, attempting to tear one of the twins from my grasp. I spun away, shielding them with my own body. Beatrice's open hand cracked against my face, a sharp, ringing slap that made my vision swim. Julian grabbed his mother, pulling her back. That's enough! But a boundary had been shattered forever. She had hit me while I was holding my newborn sons. Arthur, the butler, opened the massive oak door, and a raw, biting gust of Chicago wind howled into the foyer. The thermometer had dropped to a brutal 15 degrees. Get out, Julian said, his voice completely empty of warmth. I stared at him one last time, the man I had built a life with, the father of my children. They're only 9 days old, Julian. She's just 6 weeks behind me, Marcus. The sonogram appointment was on our shared cloud drive, with my obstetrician. For a brief moment, the polished facade of the hedge fund manager cracked, and I saw a flash of the man I married. Sheer terror, maybe even remorse. But then Sienna put a hand on his arm, and his features hardened into a cold, indifferent mask. He looked at me, his tone flat. This is a family issue. He gave a slight nod to the head of building security, who moved towards me. I instinctively stepped back, my hand moving to cover my stomach, to protect our unborn daughter. Marcus, don't, I pleaded, my voice cracking. He didn't lay a hand on me. He didn't need to. The guard just took my elbow, his touch professionally gentle, and started guiding me towards the door of our Park Avenue apartment. The hushed, climate-controlled corridor felt like a walk-in freezer. Sienna materialized in the doorway, her face a perfect portrait of victory. She scanned me from head to toe, a vicious little smile playing on her lips. He's making a portfolio adjustment, she purred, her voice laced with poison. You were a speculative asset, darling, and your valuation just plummeted. The heavy, soundproofed door clicked shut with a quiet, expensive thud. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. The Art Deco sconces in the hall seemed to grow dim. I stood there, clutching a key card that was now just a piece of plastic, dizzy, and tasting the metallic tang of a stress-induced nosebleed. My entire world had just been forcibly divested. My daughter was due in 8 weeks, and I had just been thrown out of my own home. My knees felt weak. I felt a warm, wet trickle slide down my inner thigh, where the intense pressure had broken a few of my C-section stitches. We were going to die out here on these marble steps. This was how it ended. Then something inside me shifted fundamentally. The tears turned to ice on my face. I looked up at the imposing limestone fortress, at the family inside, who were probably already forgetting about the woman and her two infant sons, freezing on their front porch. And I felt something form in my core, something cold and dense and heavy. It wasn't despair. It wasn't defeat. It was fury. A clean, focused, diamond-hard fury. I whispered to my boys, "It's okay. Mommy's here. Mommy is going to handle this," I promised in a low voice. "I swear to you, they will curse the day they were born. Every last one of them." Cradling my newborns in the bend of one arm, I reached into the designer diaper bag with my free hand and pulled out a slim, unregistered satellite phone. This was the one device they knew nothing about, my link to my real life. I pressed a single speed dial button. "Elias, it's me. It's done. I'm out. It's time to activate." "Thea? My God, where are you?" 94 Lincoln Park West on the porch. "He threw us out, Elias. The boys and me. We're freezing. You need to get here now." "I'm less than 5 minutes out. Stay put." I ended the call, pulling the cashmere shawl tighter around my sons, trying to shield their tiny bodies from the merciless wind. I clutched my stomach, a sharp contraction stealing my breath as I whispered to my unborn son, "Leo, I make you a promise. You will never know fear. You will never lack for anything. You will never be abandoned. And the man who put us out here on this street, he will regret the day he ever drew breath." A gleaming black sedan materialized from the Chicago mist, pulling flush against the curb. My lawyer, Isabel, burst from the back seat, her usual composure fractured by panic. David, her security chief, was already opening my door. "My God, Alara, you're in labor," Isabel said, wrapping a cashmere shawl around my shivering shoulders. David was already speaking into his wrist. "Code Nightingale. We're 5 minutes out from the clinic. I have Ms. Vance. Prepare for immediate delivery." They eased me into the car's plush interior, the heated seats a shocking relief to my ice-cold body. Isabel held my hand, her grip firm and steadying, as another wave of pain crested. As we pulled away, I took one last look at the towering glass penthouse. A light switched on, illuminating the floor-to-ceiling windows of his bedroom. Maybe it was Arthur. Maybe it was his new intern. A humorless smile tightened my lips. It wasn't a smile of happiness, but the smile of a general seeing the enemy's final fatal mistake. "Isabel," I said, my voice eerily level. "It's time. Launch Project Nightingale." She met my eyes in the reflection of the window, her own gaze hard as diamonds. "Alara, that's the kill switch. It will sever every financial tie." "He left his pregnant wife on the street in November," I replied. "Begin the liquidation. I want every asset frozen by dawn. No mercy," I instructed. "And Julian? He is still, on paper, your husband." I looked down at Max in my arms, then at Leo being cradled by Isabel, my perfect, blameless sons, discarded like a failed investment by the man who was supposed to be their greatest champion. "Especially Julian," I said, my voice barely audible. "I want him to wake up every single morning for the rest of his miserable life with the full, crushing realization of what he threw away." The woman known as Thea Adams, the quiet philanthropist, ceased to be on that frigid Chicago street. Thea Calloway, the reclusive founder of Argos Cybernetics, was back in command. And she was coming to collect. We raced towards a nondescript warehouse district, a 20-minute drive from Lincoln Park. My real life was based there. The top floor of an anonymous-looking tech building that was in reality my private fortress. I owned the entire city block, a fact the Vance family was blissfully unaware of. Elias had already prepped the executive suite. When we exited the secure elevator, a full medical team was waiting. A neonatologist, a pediatrician, and an OB-GYN for me. The pediatrician checked Leo and Max. Their core temperatures are stable, he said, clearly relieved. They're agitated from the exposure, but there's no lasting damage. They are going to be perfectly fine. The obstetrician then examined me, her face growing grim as she saw the damage to my incision. This is serious. You need a course of powerful intravenous antibiotics immediately, and you're critically dehydrated. You've bled more than is safe, Miss Calloway. You really need to be admitted to a proper hospital. That is not an option, I stated, my voice absolute. Not until I have this handled. The private physician looked like she wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have dissuaded her. She gave a slow nod. As you wish. But I will be staying right here. I'll be monitoring you second by second. My assistant, Isabel, carefully took the twin boys. I've got them, Thea. You need to get some rest. But rest was an impossible luxury. Elias, I said, looking at my head of operations, I want the directorate on a fully encrypted channel. Now, within 90 minutes, my core team was assembled on the massive video wall in the suite's command center. Elias, my operations chief, Isabel Renault, my lead legal counsel, Kenji Tanaka, a legendary corporate raider, and Sophia Rossi, my private forensic auditor. I sat before the screen, wrapped in a black cashmere robe Isabel had provided, an item that had cost more than $10,000. I looked less like a new mother and more like a general in her war room. I could feel my strength returning. Thank you all for convening at this hour, I began, my voice steady. For the last 18 months, you have known my public persona as Thea Adams. That identity is now terminated. I am Thea Calloway, founder of Argos. I need your collective skills to methodically ruin the lives of the people who just abandoned me and my newborn sons to freeze to death. I touched a control on the tablet in front of me, and the screen populated with professional headshots of the Vance family. Target 1, Julian Vance. Target 2, Beatrice Vance. Target 3, Chloe Vance. Target 4, Henry Vance. Sophia spoke first, her tone precise. Ma'am, as per your directive 2 months ago, I ran the deep dive financial forensics. The executive summary is on your monitor. Julian was a senior partner at a private equity firm whose biggest clients were all secretly funneled to him by a consulting group owned by Argos. He also had a severe online poker addiction, with hidden debts approaching $80,000 to a syndicate in Macau. Beatrice was the chairwoman of a major city charity that was primarily funded by an anonymous trust that I controlled. A trust from which she had been embezzling funds for years, totaling over $300,000. She had a secret account in the Cayman Islands, Chloe's boutique PR agency, which specialized in crisis management, was afloat only because its server hosting and digital infrastructure were provided at a 90% discount by a subsidiary of my company. She owed over $100,000 in back taxes, and a former employee had filed a sexual harassment claim against her that was being quietly suppressed. Henry's art dealership was almost completely dependent on acquisitions made by museums where I was the principal benefactor. He was also leveraged to the hilt, with gambling losses exceeding $150,000. I leaned back, letting the data sink in for my team. Their entire existence is a house of cards built with my resources, I said quietly. And they threw me away. Isabel, my lawyer, spoke next. I've analyzed the encrypted data logs you've been capturing from their home network. We have digital proof of a conspiracy to commit wire fraud and attempted embezzlement. Let's not forget charges for aggravated assault, slander, conspiracy to commit fraud, and criminal endangerment. We have grounds to pursue felony charges against every single one of them. David Chen, my lead counsel, continued, on the corporate side, we can invoke the morality clauses in Julian's trading contracts, force a complete forensic audit of the Croft Foundation, which will bury Eleanor, have Isabel's entire online brand de-platformed for fraud, and nullify all of Richard's lobbying agreements with our portfolio companies. We can also tip off the SEC about Eleanor's offshore accounts. Everything is airtight, and the fallout will be instantaneous. Maya Singh, my head of communications, flashed a sharp smile. And I'll shape a media narrative that they'll teach in case studies. The brilliant innovator, betrayed by her husband's venomous family, left for dead with her newborn twins, returns to reclaim what's hers. The hidden microphone recordings of their conspiracy are undeniable proof. This story is going to own the global news cycle for a month. It took me less than a second to make the call. Engage on all fronts. I want them to wake up tomorrow morning to a smoking crater where their lives once were. I want it all done by the letter of the law, under the brightest public spotlight, with every incriminating document leaked. The entire world will see them for the monsters they are. Leo looked concerned. Alara, this is total annihilation. We could get the same outcome with more discretion. I'm not interested in discretion, I retorted. I want them shattered. I want them so utterly dismantled that the name Croft becomes a synonym for disgrace. I want them to understand, in their bones, what it feels like to have it all stripped away, to watch it all turn to dust in a single moment, exactly as they planned for me. Maya nodded, a cold, predatory smile touching her lips. Then the operation launches tomorrow, October 25th, the morning of the Chicago Global Trade Summit. I smiled back. Perfect. Let their day start with absolute ruin. The next morning, October 25th, Julian woke up at 5:30 a.m. to a flood of encrypted messages. The executive partners at his investment firm were demanding his immediate presence for an emergency board meeting. He walked in at 6:45. The senior partner's face was like stone. Julian, the firm's principal investor, Vance Dynamics, has exercised its controlling interest. They conducted a full compliance review of your portfolio overnight. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately, for gross financial misconduct. We have recordings of you conspiring to defraud your wife and evidence that you engaged in illegal insider trading on 3 major accounts. Vance Dynamics has a zero-tolerance policy for racketeering. The blood drained from Julian's face. What? Your severance package is $0, as this is a termination for cause. Security will escort you from the premises. Julian was on the sidewalk by 7 a.m. No job, no capital, no future. He got to his Porsche and saw a large legal envelope jammed beneath the windshield wiper. Inside were divorce papers and an emergency petition for sole and exclusive custody of their children. A small, elegant note was clipped to the first page. The children are Vance's. You gave up the right to call yourself their father when you left them to die in a blizzard. Included were notarized DNA analysis reports, a 99.9% probability of paternity. Congratulations, you just tried to murder your own legacy. Alara. He sagged against the side of his car and was violently sick on the curb. Eleanor was approving floral arrangements for a charity gala when the foundation's chairman arrived at 8 o'clock, accompanied by 2 federal agents. He served her with a legal notice. It was a letter of immediate dismissal. She was being fired pending a federal investigation into embezzlement and wire fraud. She had to vacate the premises instantly. She called the chairman's private line. You need to stop this. There is nothing to stop, Eleanor. Our primary benefactor, the Vance Institute, demanded a surprise audit. They found everything. You have 60 minutes to collect your personal belongings. Who is the Vance Institute? I am not authorized to disclose that information. She disconnected the call, her body trembling with rage. A moment later, one of the agents approached her. Eleanor Croft? Yes? You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. They snapped cuffs onto her wrists as they recited her Miranda rights. Richard watched in disbelief as his wife was guided into an unmarked sedan. Bail was set at $1 million. It was a sum Richard couldn't possibly raise. She would be sleeping in a cell tonight. Isabel was in the middle of a live stream promoting an ethically sourced tea at 9 a.m. when all her social media accounts simultaneously went dark. An eviction order was taped to the door of her chic Lincoln Park penthouse. The entire building was being seized by the city for immediate structural review. All occupants must be out of the building within 24 hours. Her property manager called her, his voice frantic. What is going on? The new owners, Vance Properties, commissioned a full engineering report. The building is a death trap. Substandard steel, black mold, a cracked foundation. It's a miracle the whole thing hasn't collapsed. She burst into her apartment to get her passport and saw an envelope that had been pushed under her door. It was a summons for a civil suit alleging defamation, trademark infringement, and conspiracy. The plaintiff was Alara Vance. The lawsuit was seeking damages of $10 million. Attached was a detailed report on the click farms she used to fake her online influence, wire transfers tracing her payments to them, and transcripts of her encrypted messages with her family. Everything. She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. They knew everything. Richard Croft received 3 calls in the span of 5 minutes that morning. His 3 most powerful lobbying clients were terminating their retainers. His bank then called to inform him his business line of credit had been sold overnight to Vance Financial and was being called in. In under an hour, Richard had lost his entire business and was now facing a personal debt of over $500,000 due immediately. He called Julian. This is a targeted strike. Someone is trying to systematically erase us. Julian's voice was a dead, hollow thing. I know who it is. Who? Alara, he choked out. It's Alara. Alara, your wife? The part-time graphic designer? How is that even possible? I don't think she was ever a graphic designer, Dad, Julian said, his voice cracking. I don't think we had any idea who she really was. They gathered at the family home, Richard, Isabel, and Julian. Eleanor was in federal custody. They stood in the same drawing room where they had plotted my death, where they had called me a pathetic leech. Richard spoke first. This Vance person is systematically taking our family apart. Who in the hell is Vance? Isabel looked up from her phone, her face pale. Alara's maiden name. It's Vance. A heavy, unbreathable silence descended on the room. Julian just shook his head, refusing to believe it. No, that's impossible. She's nobody. Did you even once do a proper background check on the woman you married? Richard roared. No. Did you ever know a single true thing about her? Julian's composure finally shattered. Oh my God, what did we do? Isabel was frantically searching online for Alara Vance, CEO, when the financial news network, playing on the large screen, cut to a breaking story. And in a stunning development on Wall Street, the private energy behemoth Vance Dynamics has just completed a hostile takeover of the investment firm Croft Capital. A deal sources say is valued at over $3 billion. The graphic behind the anchor changed to show a corporate headshot. Leading this aggressive acquisition is the firm's notoriously private founder and CEO, making her first official statement in over 5 years, Alara Vance. Alara Vance. The image filled the screen, and Julian's whiskey glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. It was Alara, his his quiet, unassuming wife, whom he had just cast out into a deadly Chicago blizzard. No, no, that can't be real, he whispered, but it was. Every television in the room was showing her face, projecting an aura of absolute terrifying control. Alara Vance, the shadowy genius behind Vance Dynamics. Alara Vance, the multi-billionaire titan of green technology. And they had called her a pathetic gold digger. They had schemed to destroy her. They had thrown her and his children, his own newborn daughters, into a snowstorm to die because they thought she was worthless. His sister, Isabel, voiced the thought paralyzing them all. We're finished. We are absolutely, totally finished. Julian stared at the screen showing Alara, not the gentle, simple woman he thought he knew, but Alara Vance. Looking powerful, brilliant, and completely beyond his reach. He had tried to break her, and in doing so, he had given her the perfect motive to publicly execute his entire family. And this was only the beginning. On November 3rd, 1 week later, the official press release was sent to every major news outlet at 6 a.m. Vance Dynamics, famously reclusive CEO Alara Vance, to hold an emergency press conference at 10 a.m. regarding the dissolution of Croft Capital's assets. The media exploded. The New York Times, the Financial Times, Bloomberg, every global and local Chicago network fought for credentials. Financial experts, political commentators, nobody was certain what was coming. But when the head of a secretive, multi-billion-dollar energy firm made her first public address, in half a decade, the world stopped to watch. The press conference was held at the Vance Tower headquarters, in an auditorium that held 500. Every seat was taken. I was in my executive office on the top floor, making my final review. My chief of staff, Leo, straightened the collar of my cobalt blue power suit, custom made by Armani, blue for authority, for control. My hair and makeup were flawless. I looked precisely like the person I had been all along, a commander, a visionary. The twins were sleeping soundly in the adjoining private suite, with their nanny and two of my personal security detail, completely safe. My chief of staff, David, adjusted the audio feed. Are you certain about this, Eliza? Once you push this live, there's no turning back. I'm certain, I replied, my eyes fixed on the central monitor. The evidence is irrefutable. It will be the end of his career. It'll be on every blog in the country within minutes. Excellent, I said. I want it on every blog. I want everyone to see what he was planning. I took one last look at the bank of screens, showing the packed ballroom. This was the moment I reclaimed my company, the moment I took back my future. Let's begin. I watched as Leo Sterling, my husband, walked onto the stage at precisely 8 o'clock. A respectful hush fell over the hall, filled with the city's most powerful donors. I watched him scan the sea of politicians, financiers, and journalists before stepping up to the lectern. He adjusted the microphone and smiled warmly into the main broadcast camera. My name is Leo Sterling. For the last 4 years, I have had the honor of serving on this city's council. I am a husband and a soon-to-be father. I am running for mayor of Boston because I believe in family, integrity, and transparency. He paused, letting the applause wash over him. I am also a man who has been blessed with a wonderful wife, who is at home on mandatory bed rest, carrying our first child. Just as he said that, I gave the signal. The massive screens behind him, meant to display a slideshow of him kissing babies, flickered to life with something else entirely. A series of text messages. Messages between my husband and his campaign manager, Cassandra Thorne. Messages about me. The hushed hall erupted into a murmur of confusion. I raised my hand, though they couldn't see me. Please, I said, my voice now broadcasting into the ballroom sound system, overriding the microphones. Let me finish the story. I promise there will be time for questions. Silence returned, thick with shock. 5 years ago, I met a man named Leo Sterling. I told him everything. I detailed my desire to keep my identity as the head of a private equity firm a secret, the subtle gaslighting throughout my high-risk pregnancy, the doctor Cassandra recommended, who insisted on total isolation, their plot to have me declared mentally incompetent after the birth, and their plan to seize control of my company's assets. As I spoke, the screens behind the now frozen Leo Sterling came to life. Transcripts of texts and audio clips filled the ballroom. The audience watched in stunned silence as Cassandra's messages to a private investigator appeared. Find anything. Old boyfriends, work stress. We need to build the narrative that she's unstable. They then heard Leo's voice in a secretly recorded clip, telling Cassandra, she just needs to stay put and deliver a healthy heir. After that, she can have a long rest in a comfortable facility while we run things. They saw the plan laid out in cold, hard text. Use postpartum psychosis as a pretext to get a judge to grant him medical proxy over my affairs. The final image was a text from Leo to Cassandra. Don't worry about the baby. Once I have control of the Vance Trust, you and I can have a real family. By the time the screen went black, many in the room were looking at Leo with pure disgust. The rest looked absolutely furious. They planned to have me committed based on a lie they were manufacturing. My voice echoed through the hall. They chose to believe in their own greed rather than the woman carrying their child and heir. I let the silence stretch. What Mr. Sterling was unaware of when he plotted to steal my life was that he lives in a Beacon Hill brownstone that my family trust owns. He built a political career funded by my capital. His entire man of the people persona is underwritten by my silent partnership. A wave of gasps and furious whispers swept through the donors. Leo Sterling's campaign is entirely financed by a series of anonymous donations that trace back to a shell corporation I control. His grassroots support was manufactured by a PR firm my company acquired 2 years ago. Cassandra Thorne's political consulting firm was launched with a seed investment from a venture fund I manage. Their very careers were dependent on my resources. I let that information land like a torpedo. And they repaid that support by manipulating me during a high-risk pregnancy, by conspiring to brand me an unfit mother, and by plotting to have me institutionalized and stripped of my child and my company, all while I was at my most vulnerable. My voice grew stronger, colder, but I am not a victim. I am a mother who will defend her child. I am a CEO who will not be broken, and I am a woman who refuses to be erased. I signaled David, and new images appeared on the screen, professional headshots of Leo and Cassandra. Effective today, I am filing for divorce from Leo Sterling and seeking sole custody of our son. My legal team is meeting with the district attorney to pursue charges of conspiracy to commit fraud and attempted grand larceny against both of them. Civil suits for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress will be filed. And finally, all financial ties between my entities and Mr. Sterling and Mrs. Thorne are hereby permanently severed. Furthermore, I am announcing the launch of the Phoenix Fund, a $500 million initiative from Vance Capital dedicated to providing legal, financial, and strategic support for female executives and founders being pushed out by predatory partners. The room erupted. I let it build for a moment. I am telling this story not just for retribution, though accountability will be absolute. I am telling it because abuse is not always physical. It happens in boardrooms and bedrooms. It hides behind charm, ambition, and political promises. If you are experiencing this, please know, document everything. Trust your instincts. Build a network that is loyal to you. Create a bulletproof exit strategy. And never forget that your power is your own. You are worthy of respect. Do not ever accept anything less. Thank you. I cut the feed. Within 30 minutes, the story was the #1 political headline in the nation. Hashtag Sterling Takedown, hashtag Vance Vengeance, hashtag Boston Betrayal. The hijacked campaign feed received over 400 million views in the first 24 hours. Every network led with the story. Boston mayoral hopeful's career ends in shocking mid-speech broadcast by billionaire wife. Reclusive heiress Eliza Vance exposes husband's plot to have her committed and seize control of her fortune. The story was a political firestorm, op-eds, cable news panels, and a social media inferno. Famous investors weighed in. Warren Buffett was quoted as saying, "A masterful, if brutal, defense of shareholder interests." Sheryl Sandberg posted, "Let this be a lesson. Never ever underestimate the woman who owns the company." Leo and Cassandra couldn't leave the ballroom. Reporters were swarming the venue. Their personal emails were leaked, and they were inundated with messages of pure fury, which I publicly asked people to stop sending. Leo tried to flee through a service exit and was instantly recognized. People followed him down the street with their phones. "You tried to steal from your pregnant wife. What kind of man plots against the mother of his own child? She was a billionaire, you fool, and you thought you could outsmart her." He fled in a staff member's car, a political pariah in the city he had hoped to lead. Cassandra, after being fired, tried to defend herself on X, writing, "This was a gross violation of our privacy." The replies were savage. "So is plotting to have someone falsely committed. She was testing your loyalty, and you failed in the most spectacular way possible. He was running on integrity. You both are monsters." Leo and Cassandra became the most reviled people in Boston overnight. The valuation of Vance Capital, ironically, saw a significant uptick. Wall Street adored the story of a brilliant, decisive leader who ruthlessly eliminated a threat to her company and legacy. I was invited everywhere. A special with George Stephanopoulos, an interview on the Pivot podcast, a guest column in the Wall Street Journal. I was on the cover of Fortune. The Ghost in the Machine, How Eliza Vance Turned a Vicious Betrayal into a Masterclass in Power. I became a symbol, not of wealth or revenge, but of strategy, foresight, and the power of controlling your own narrative. Leo and Cassandra also became symbols of greed, of arrogance, and of the catastrophic consequences of underestimating a woman. Their careers were obliterated. 3 days later, on September 10th, the authorities acted. Cassandra was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and defamation. Leo was charged with conspiracy, attempted grand larceny, and perjury for statements he'd made on his financial disclosures. The private investigator he and Cassandra had hired cooperated fully, providing a detailed statement and promising to testify against them in exchange for immunity. The legal process was swift. The digital evidence against them was overwhelming. The raw audio recordings were absolutely damning. During Leo's trial, the prosecutor played the recording of him and Cassandra mocking me and outlining their plan to seize the Vance Trust. A financial expert confirmed that their plot, if successful, would have constituted one of the largest private frauds in the state's history. An obstetrician testified that the level of calculated stress they planned to inflict on me post-birth could have had life-threatening consequences. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. The verdict came back, guilty on all counts. The judge's voice filled the courtroom. "Mr. Sterling, in my 31 years on the bench, I have seldom seen such a stunning abuse of marital and public trust. You weaponized the birth of your own child to orchestrate a breathtakingly cynical financial coup. Catherine maintained a stoic facade, but the 16-year federal prison sentence sent Sophie into a complete meltdown. "That viper is a monster," she shrieked. "She's getting exactly what she has coming to her." The judge replied, without emotion, "Your own godson was the one who required saving from you." During Catherine's federal trial, the audio forensics analyst verified the recordings from the concealed microphone. The private investigator, a man named Victor Morales, testified in exchange for immunity. "She paid me $30,000, he admitted. "She hired me to create a false narrative that would destroy her daughter-in-law's reputation." The damning transcripts were displayed on screens for the entire courtroom to read. Catherine had instructed, "Frame her as an unfaithful corporate spy." Victor had replied, "This will be the end of her career." Sophie had typed back, "Perfect. I want her utterly ruined." The jury found her guilty. Her sentence was 7 years in federal prison, along with a $50,000 fine. At Julian's trial, his defense attorney argued that he was a casualty of his mother's deep-seated psychological manipulation. However, the prosecutor played the security footage from our condominium's hallway. It showed Julian shoving me to the ground on the icy stone floor, his face a mask of pure indifference. I was summoned to the witness stand, laying eyes on him for the first time since that awful night. The prosecutor began, "Mrs. Sterling, can you please recount for the court the events of the evening of November 5th? My voice was clear and firm. My husband expelled me from the home we owned together. I was 37 weeks pregnant with our twin boys. I was experiencing the first contractions of labor. I was about to give birth to our sons. The outside temperature was 45 degrees during a freezing sleet storm. He pushed me down, then he spun around, went back inside, slammed the door, and engaged the deadbolt." The prosecutor asked, "Did he say anything to you?" I replied, "He screamed that he had no clue whose babies I was carrying. I had told him over and over again that they were his. I had even offered to submit to a paternity test the moment they were born." He made a conscious decision to believe a lie instead of having faith in me, instead of safeguarding his own children. The prosecutor then inquired, "And what was your emotional condition at that time?" I turned my head and stared directly at Julian for the first time, shattered, terrified, and absolutely, completely alone. Julian began to weep uncontrollably at the defense table. The jury found him guilty of reckless endangerment, though he was found not guilty on the assault charge. They were convinced he had been profoundly manipulated. He was sentenced to 5 years of probation, court-ordered therapy, and was granted only supervised visitation. He was also ordered to pay $5,000 a month in child support. The judge then added, "Mr. Sterling, your appalling lack of moral fortitude opened the door for the monstrous abuse of your wife and your unborn children. You were too much of a coward to defy your mother. You prioritized your loyalty to a predator over the safety of your own family. I would advise you to use every second of your supervised visits to reflect on exactly what you discarded." Following the criminal trials, I brought a civil suit against all 3 of them for emotional distress. The jury awarded me $5 million from Catherine, $2 million from Sophie, and $1 million from Julian. I gave every last cent to the Cornerstone Foundation. "I have no need for their corrupt money," I told the news crews. "I want them to learn that their choices have consequences. I want other abusers to see what happens when they target the wrong woman." It's a late spring afternoon, during that magical golden hour. My brownstone apartment overlooks a park in Chicago, with a rooftop garden I designed and had built the moment I moved in. Leo and Max, my sons, are waddling across the soft grass, chasing bubbles that their godmother, Maya, is blowing for them. Maya's daughter, Lily, who is now 5, is showing them the most effective popping technique. I'm watching them from a wooden bench, wearing faded jeans and an old architecture school sweatshirt, with no makeup on and my hair pulled into a messy knot. A deep sense of peace settles over me. Maya finishes with the bubbles and sits down next to me. "Are you genuinely doing okay today?" she asks. "Yeah, today is a good one," I reply. "Dr. Evans says I'm making real, tangible progress. I'm sleeping through the night most of the time now." The panic attacks have finally started to fade. "That's incredible," she says. We watch the children scampering around. "You know, it's all right if you're not okay," she says gently. "You don't have to play the part of the unbreakable star architect all the time." I manage a small, tired smile. I am so sick of being called resilient. I don't feel resilient. I feel like I'm running on spite and blueprints. "That's just called being a person," Maya says, "and that's 1,000 times more resilient than pretending you have it all figured out." Just then, Leo trips and lands hard on his bottom, and his face crumples as he starts to cry. I'm by his side in an instant, lifting him into my arms and checking for any scrapes. "You're all right, my love." "It was just a little tumble. See? Nothing's broken." Leo's crying subsides. He wipes his nose on my sweatshirt, wiggles to be put down, and immediately dashes back to the game. "You are such a fantastic mother. You realize that, right?" Maya says. I gaze at my sons, my chest aching with love. "I'm a terrified mother," I say, correcting her. "I wake up afraid every single morning, afraid someone will try to hurt them, afraid I'll mess them up, afraid I won't be enough for them." "That's just love," Maya tells me. "That's how you know you're doing everything right." A car pulls into the private garage, and Richard gets out, holding a small gift bag. I feel that automatic, familiar tension in my neck. It's a reflex. He had texted, "Running a little ahead of schedule. Should I wait in the car?" I had written back, "No, it's fine. Please come up." Richard takes the elevator to the rooftop. The boys spot him and start running. "Grandpa." He lowers himself to his knees, his movements slow and careful. "Hello, my boys. Look what I have for you." He pulls out 2 small, beautifully crafted wooden models of the city's drawbridges. The boys are captivated. He sits on the grass with them, showing them how the little gears work, making soft creak-creak sounds as the boys shriek with laughter. Maya watches him like a hawk. She will never forgive him. "Are you sure about this?" she whispers. "He testified against both of them," I reply quietly. "He told the entire, unvarnished truth. He's putting in the effort, and the boys should have at least one grandparent who isn't a sociopath. He stood by while that woman tore his family apart for 40 years, she reminds me. I know, but he's also the only one who has shown a single ounce of genuine remorse, the only one doing the actual work. So, I am giving him this chance. It's supervised, it's for a short time, but I am offering him this." Richard looks up, and our eyes connect. He mouths the words, "Thank you." I give him a tiny nod in return. My phone vibrates. It's a text from a number I don't have saved. I know I shouldn't, but I open it. I know I don't have any right to ask. I know I destroyed everything that mattered in our lives. But please, just talk to me one last time. Let me try to explain. Let me apologize to your face. I am begging you, Ava. Please. It's a message from Julian. I stare at the words on the screen for a long while. Maya leans over to read it. "Are you going to answer him?" she asks. "No." "Good," she says. He's searching for forgiveness to soothe his own guilty conscience. That is not your responsibility to manage anymore. My responsibility is to protect my sons. And I can't do that by letting the man who was willing to let them be born on a freezing, hard floor back into our lives. But what if he's really changed? What if he is truly sorry? Then he can prove it by honoring my boundaries, by paying his child support on time, without being reminded, by showing up for his supervised visits, sober and on time, by doing the hard work of changing without needing me to applaud his efforts. I delete the message and block his number. I don't feel any hatred for him anymore. I just feel nothing at all when I think of him. And that feeling, right there, is the very definition of being free. We sit in comfortable silence for another minute, watching our kids play as the sun dips below the skyline. My architecture firm has grown to a $50 million valuation. I have been featured on the cover of Architectural Digest 3 times. The Cornerstone Foundation now funds community design centers in 8 different states. We have helped 2,847 women and their children in the past 18 months, and our reach is growing every day. I make it my personal mission to mentor survivors of domestic violence. I deliver keynote speeches. I share my story. I've started dating again, but only casually. I'm not ready for anything serious yet. I told Maya maybe one day. But for now, my sons and my work are everything I need. Julian was permanently stripped of his real estate licenses. He works as a logistics coordinator at a warehouse for $20 an hour. He lives in a cramped studio apartment in an industrial area of town. He sees his sons once a month for 1 hour at a family visitation center. At every single visit, the boys cry. Model: our son doesn't know his father. He points to pictures and calls him the man from the book. During every video call, which a therapist oversees, Leo just cries. Marcus is in therapy, not just because the court demanded it, but because he claims he's desperate to rebuild himself. He sent me a detailed architectural blueprint for a supposed forever home, complete with renderings and landscape plans for winning me back. I archived the email without a word. In his sterile, rented apartment overlooking a highway, he has one framed photo, a candid of me, beaming, at the groundbreaking of his first skyscraper. Before the lies. Before he decided to demolish our life. He says it's his nightly reminder of the foundational error he can never undo. He'll never develop another building in this city. His name is toxic. In the world of urban planning, every online search is an obituary for his career. The exposés in the architectural digests, the leaked financial records. He's an outcast, a ghost in the city he helped build, living with the consequences of his ambition. Isabel is in year 2 of a 9-year sentence at a federal prison in Illinois for wire fraud and money laundering. She sorts mail for 30 cents an hour. She has no one left. Marcus's lawyer reached out to her legal team once. They responded with a restraining order. Her own family, a Chicago institution, cut her off completely after the sentencing. My former intern, another young designer, Marcus, had been mentoring, is serving her sentence in a different facility. She cooperated with the prosecution. I got one letter from her, typed on a prison letterhead. I made a catastrophic mistake. I pray you find peace. I tore it in half after seeing her signature. Isabel will be 43 when she gets out. The intern is doing 2 years. She lost it all. Her parents have guardianship of her son. She works in the prison's law library. I've heard she's filed 4 appeals, and all have been denied. She sends a formal, sterile apology through her attorney every quarter. My paralegal files them, unopened. Isabel will be a middle-aged woman when she's released, with a felony conviction, no design license, and a reputation that will shadow her for life. Marcus is the only one not behind bars, but he's hardly free. He lives in a small apartment on the city's outskirts and does freelance drafting work for firms that don't care about his past. He has his supervised visit with our son once a month in a bland municipal building. He always brings a single perfect white rose, my favorite. He tries to talk to Leo. He looks at him with this raw, desperate hope. Our son usually just plays with his blocks and ignores him. He calls him Marcus. I permit the visits because a judge ordered them and because I want my son to understand that his father's moral collapse is not his inheritance. In the end, it was Marcus who provided the key evidence against Isabel, who testified about the shell corporations, who tried to salvage some piece of himself from the wreckage he engineered. He chokes up at the start and end of every single visit. I'm so sorry, he tells me, every time. I am so fundamentally sorry for the structure I destroyed. I have not forgiven him. I don't think I ever can. You invited a wrecking ball into our home, and you let it swing, I told him during the deposition. You knew what she was, and you chose her, but you also lit the fuse to bring it all down in the end. So you get this. You can see your son, but you will always, always be a visitor. He just nodded, his face wet with tears, and signed the agreement. He knows it's more than he deserves. The late afternoon sun streams through the window, casting long shadows. The supervisor brings Leo back to me. Thank you for this, Eleanor. I will see you next month. He walks away without a second glance. My friend Clara helps me buckle Leo into his car seat. Same time next month? She asks softly. It's on the calendar, I say. Love you, Elle. You saved my life, you know. We're square, I reply with a small smile. We're family. Fine. Love you, family. We share a quick hug, and then Clara drives off. I'm alone with my boy. Leo is getting sleepy, rubbing his eyes. All right, my little lion, let's go home. A bath, then a story. Leo asks. Story, Mama. Yes, my love. Always a story. He whispers, Mama, stay. My eyes well up, but for the first time in a long time, they're tears of gratitude. Yes, my love. Mama will always stay. Mama will never, ever leave you. I lift him into my arms. He feels so solid, so real against me. I carry him toward the warm light of our brownstone. People ask if I regret not demanding a prenup, if I regret trusting his vision for our future, if I wish I'd seen the cracks in the foundation sooner. The honest answer is no. Every choice, every mistake, and every victory led me here, to this moment, with him. They tried to demolish me, and for a time, they succeeded. I shattered into a million pieces on that cold marble floor 2 years ago. But this is the one thing they never understood about destroying something. You don't get to approve the new blueprints. I rebuilt myself with a stronger frame, a clearer purpose, and a spine made of reinforced steel. I am not the woman I was. I don't give my trust away. My home is a restored historic landmark, a fortress I designed myself. I speak with my therapist every Wednesday. I have medication for the nights the panic still tries to seep in. Sometimes the distant sound of a construction crane makes my heart race. I am scarred, without a doubt, but I am not broken. There is a universe of difference. To anyone out there listening who feels like they are in the dark, I want you to know I see you. 2 years ago, I was you. I was locked out, with nothing, stripped of every asset I thought was mine. My home, my financial future, my marriage. He believed I was just a blueprint, that without his name, I was nothing. But he was wrong. I still had myself. I had a will of iron and a love for my unborn son that was more powerful than any real estate empire. That was everything. It was the entire world. Now, in the warm, bubbly water, the sound of his giggles echoes in the bathroom. I carefully shampoo his hair, sculpting it into a little wave. He chatters to his fleet of toy boats in his own secret language. After his bath, we pick out pajamas. Tonight, he wants the ones with the little yellow bulldozers. He points to them himself, a tiny, decisive foreman. For our story, I choose Good Night, Construction Site. It's a world away from the complex, zoning regulations Marcus used to read in bed. This beautiful, simple book is our ritual, a new foundation for me and my son, built on the ruins of a painful past. In the story, the trucks all go to sleep, and right on cue, Leo is already drifting off, his breathing growing deep and steady, his small body heavy against me. I kiss his soft hair, turn on the moon and stars nightlight, and pull his door mostly closed. I walk down the hall to my office, sit at my desk, and pull up the dashboard for the Hearthstone Foundation. The screen is a collage of faces, women we've housed, children playing in safe backyards, families rebuilding. 1,247 families housed and supported. The number glows in the top corner. All that pain was repurposed. It became leverage. Not the hollow power I once knew, the kind tied to property values and magazine features. This is real power, the power to offer a woman a key to a safe new home, to fund her fight against foreclosure, to help her escape a toxic environment. I minimize the window and look at the only picture on my desk. It's me in the hospital, holding Leo moments after he was born, looking utterly exhausted but fiercely protective. I won. Not because he and his mistress faced consequences, not because I won the settlement. I won because I am safe, because my son is happy, and because I finally built my own life. From the baby monitor, I hear the soft, rhythmic sound of Leo's breathing. That brutal moment on the cold pavement, utterly alone, felt like the end of everything. In reality, it was the beginning of my true power. It was the instant I stopped dimming my own light to protect a man's fragile pride. He thought of me as a decorative piece of his life, easily discarded. But from that single moment of ruin, I forged a dynasty. I switch off the light in my office, walk through the quiet penthouse, and check on my sleeping son. The nightmares that once plagued me are just faint echoes now, powerless. Tomorrow I will wake up, kiss my child, build a Lego castle with him, and then go to my office to protect the fortunes of other women who were underestimated. I will thrive on my own authority, the empire I engineered, the sanctuary I constructed, the life that is now impenetrable. My name is Alara Vance. I am a CEO. I am a guardian. I am a survivor. But more than anything, I am a mother, and I am finally secure. The following morning, sunlight floods our breakfast nook. I'm meticulously placing raspberries on oatmeal, while Leo provides a drum solo with a wooden spoon against the table. He suddenly stops, his wide, thoughtful eyes locking on mine, and asks, "Mommy, you safe?" I freeze, the spoon in my hand, and just absorb the beautiful, innocent concern on his face. "Yes, my love," I manage to say, my throat tight with emotion. "Mommy is very, very safe." He then reaches his small, slightly sticky hand to my cheek and whispers, "I protect you, Mommy." A warmth blooms in my chest, and I have to blink back tears, not of pain, but of pure, overwhelming joy. "You two are my whole world," I whisper, my voice catching, "my entire universe." I lean over and kiss both their sticky foreheads. Leo giggles, smearing pancake on my cheek, and I find I couldn't care less. Clara walks into the kitchen, placing a fresh mug of coffee in my hands. We lean against the island, in a comfortable silence, just watching the twins demolish their breakfast with happy, messy enthusiasm. "You really took him down," she says, her voice quiet and filled with admiration. "The untouchable Marcus Thorne." A small, real smile touches my lips. "We did. I'd still be trapped in that glass penthouse if it wasn't for you." Clara nudges my arm. "So what's next for Eleanor Vance? You exposed Chicago's biggest real estate fraud, built a new life from the wreckage, and launched a whole foundation. What's your next adventure? Trekking through the Himalayas? My eyes drift back to Caleb and Daniel, to the morning light pouring into this small, quiet kitchen that I fought with everything I had to secure. A life that is, at last, ours. Stable, peaceful, and entirely on our terms. There are no more battles to fight, I whisper to the morning sun. There is nothing left to conquer. There is only this, only him, only now. And for the first time, that feels more profound than any victory. It feels like peace. At that moment, Leo giggles, a pure, bubbling sound that fills the entire room, as our golden retriever, Sam, licks his face. I find myself laughing with them, a deep, joyful sound I was certain had been stolen from me forever. This sunlit apartment, overlooking Lake Michigan, is my fortress now. This little boy is my entire world. This feeling is my triumph, and no man like Arthur will ever get close enough to threaten it again.